Hello everyone and welcome to the Resilience Sessions, a podcast that brings together injured veterans from Blesma, the Limbless Veterans charity, and a well-known public figure to share stories of overcoming challenges of all kinds.
The podcast provides an opportunity for our guests to chat with one another about their stories, sharing how they overcome their ups and downs so we can learn from them both. We hope you enjoy it.
And now to our guests. Emily Dean is an author, producer, broadcaster and podcaster. She is perhaps best known for being Frank Skinner's radio sidekick and author of Everybody Died, So I Got a Dog, a memoir that stretches from her bohemian childhood to the loss of her sister, mother and father in adulthood, and the finding of her new best friend, Raymond the Shih Tzu. Hello, Emily.
Hello, Alice. Thank you so much for asking me to be here. I'm thrilled to be here. And I have got Raymond with me, just so everyone knows.
And our next guest is Darren Swift, or Swifty. He is a veteran, Blesma member, the first above-knee double amputee snowboarder in the world. I think I've got that right. A snowboarding instructor, a Winter Paralympic hopeful, actor, and Making Generation R speaker. Welcome, Swifty.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Alice. Cheers. Hi, everyone.
Before we kick off, you're going to have to tell us why they call you Swifty.
Well, it's not because I'm fast on my feet. No, I'm Swifty just from my school days, really, just Swifty. I used to be called, actually, there was another nickname I had in school, which was Chesh, which was for Cheshire Cat, because apparently I smiled like a Cheshire Cat.
Oh, and still do.
I can't see it myself, but there you go. Yeah.
Well, welcome to you both. So I'm going to begin, first of all, Emily, with you. Now, you write in your book about having a very unusual upbringing. Can you tell us more about that?
How long have you got, guys? It was certainly, I think, bohemian, artsy, quirky, unusual. You know, those would all be good ways of describing it. And my family were in the media. My mum was an actor and my dad presented a late night art show. And what it meant was that our house was, you know, it was always dinner parties late into the night where there'd be philosophers and poets and, you know, all sorts of interesting people there. And it meant that my sister Rachel and I were adulted at quite a young age, essentially. You know, we'd be invited to these parties and we would be expected to talk to, you know, we'd be sat next to someone and I'd say, who's that? And they'd say, oh, that's Michael Foot, the leader of the Labour Party. Just make conversation. I think I'm 6. I don't know what to say. So it was a very bohemian, it was a sort of a benign chaos and we moved around a lot. But I always wanted to be in a dog family because dog families represented to me, I suppose, constancy and stability. And as I'm sure everyone here knows, everyone to a degree wants what they don't experience. You know, you look through other people's, you know, through the shop window, don't you, thinking, oh, that would be nice. And dog families to me meant people with Labradors, and I always thought they drove Volvos and they had Tupperware. And we got black cabs, which we couldn't afford or pay for, and we ate canapes for breakfast, you know. So it sounds kind of exciting, and it was, but I think I just, you know, there's a tax to be paid on that kind of interesting childhood in that I didn't have those beats that I suppose other kids that I knew did. So except for my sister, who was sort of my rock, really, but she was my anchor. I used to call her my anchor.
I think as you also, and I read your book, it was just, I sort of couldn't, obviously I could believe what I was reading, but it does sound incredibly glamorous and really exciting. I'm sure if I'd been your friend, I would have thought, like, you know, my house was just really boring.
It was interesting because we were, of course, you know, because my parents were chaotic with money, you know, that bohemian lifestyle also comes with that. So it meant that I suppose we'd have sort of strange periods in our life where my dad was one of those people. He was slightly resistant to settling down and domestic constancy. He was terrified of that, you know, but it meant that he would also overshare with my sister and I a hell of a lot. And we were exposed to stuff, which is funny in retrospect. You know, I remember him saying to me when I was quite young, he said, you see, the thing is, you know, ideally I would have been a priest because I'm a man of letters and I'm an academic essentially. But I have male desires, which means I see myself as a kind of sensuous monk. And I remember looking at my sister when we were about 7, and I thought, I don't want my dad to be a sensuous monk. I just want him to sort of watch telly, to just be a normal dad.
Yeah.
And was there any part of you that actually tried to rationalise that? Oh, that's kind of what dads say to me, or did you always just think, no, this is really strange?
No, I always felt it was, to be honest, I knew it was funny.
Yeah.
And so my sister and I, because we had this slightly odd childhood that I knew was different to other people's, our way of, I suppose, to a degree, it was a way of not coping with it, because that sounds dramatic, but our way of navigating our way through it was to use it as a comic currency. It was a joke, it was funny. People would always say, my grandmother, who we'd often go and stay with her, if my mum was, wanted a late night or something, and she had 5 husbands, and she lived in a flat in Brixton, and her lodger was a male stripper. So we had this really odd childhood where on the one hand, we'd be with my family in Highgate and we'd be chatting to all these, the editor of the Times and Michael Fur. And then we go to this flat in Brixton with a male stripper where my grandmother would be drinking and waking us up at God knows when. But in a sense, looking back on that, I love that I had that life experience, because it means that I was exposed to all sorts of different people, and that is something that I look at. Some people, I suppose, growing up in an area which is a, relatively privileged area of North London, that's all they know is other people like them, and so it's made me, I suppose, it's given me good qualities as well.
Swifty, did you have the dog family upbringing that Emily talks about?
I wouldn't say that we had. We definitely weren't. We were a dog family in as much we had a dog. We always had a dog, but we weren't. We definitely didn't have a Volvo. But
we did.
I think we had a Ford. we had a Ford Cortina estate that kept breaking down, I think. But no, it was just a normal upbringing. I think just a normal west of London upbringing. There was nothing really very exciting. I used to enjoy travel. That was my thing. I used to love going away on holiday. Not so much for the holiday, and I mean a holiday in the UK this was, but just for the travel, going somewhere different, seeing somewhere new, meeting new people. That was my excitement, I suppose. It was just not a bad upbringing at all, not in any way, but it was just a normal upbringing. There's nothing as exciting as yours, Emily. I'm sure. I'd love to have met some of the people you met at 6 years old. Yeah.
I don't think anyone's got it as exciting as Emily.
I know.
That sounds super cool.
Yeah.
Although it's interesting because I suppose you think that, but it's that, it's that thing where I probably would have looked at your background, Swifty, and that just would have seemed, you describe it as normal. You describe it as, that's what I would have wanted. Do you know what I mean? I probably would have looked at that and thought, well, you probably had a notion of bedtimes or some domestic structure, I would imagine. And I think I would have looked at you and thought, oh, he gets to put pajamas on and go to bed at a normal time. He doesn't have to talk to weirdos until 3 a.m.
And Emily, in your book, you talk about struggling to find a strong sense of self because you're constantly or having to adapt or perform to get on with all these different people. And do you think that this sense of self is something you can develop, or do you think it's something that people, it's just innate in them? I know you speak about your friend Frank Skinner, who you say, he's just always kind of known who he is.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think when you don't know that you don't really have a strongly defined sense of self, I think until for me, it was sort of, tragedy, I suppose. And looking back, partly through therapy, which I found really helpful, because I realised what had happened is I'd had grown up with these eclectic characters, who I've described to you. And as a result, sometimes it can be hard when you have parents who are that exciting, as you said, and glamorous and interesting, to find your own space and your own voice. You become the scenery, you become a bit part player in a sense. I describe it in my book. I said how people always say that when they have kids, that they have to recede and become the frame and the children become the canvas, whereas that just never happened with us. As I said, my parents were the Jackson Pollock. We were just two daubs of paint. And it was like, oh, that'll look nice. But there was great love there. But the sense of self thing was interesting for me. That was something I only realised. I would look at people, and you mentioned Frank Skinner. That's a very good example, because I would look at Frank and I just had this sense, it felt like he was a unicorn to me, because there was no conceit in terms of, there was no sense of him presenting himself. There was no sense of, I'm in this room, how shall I be with Swifty? How shall I be with Alice? It was just, this is me, whatever the weather. And to a lot of people, that's normal. But I think when you've been brought up with performers where we were very much sort of, we're going to these people's, and even our clothes would change in our manner, because that was that performing background. And I remember when I was really conscious of it with Frank, that it was just, his honesty was to the point of being ill-advised sometimes. But, it was his honesty. And that was his, sounds an naff word, but it's his truth. And I don't know. I would imagine, I look at someone like Swifty. I've only met you, virtually and in an audio capacity. And I feel, given the kind of work that you did, you probably had a strongly defined sense of self, because you've got no time to mess around in the line of work that you did. You have to be honest.
Yeah. I think I probably went into the military with a certain amount of sense of self, but yeah, the military definitely developed. I joined at 16. So I was a young boy. I was as everyone is at 16, a sponge, ready to be educated and ready to be shown the ways of the world, sort of thing. So I joined at 16, and very, very much an education. I didn't have any education. I didn't really knuckle down at school. I wasn't academically minded, but I knew I wanted a life of, and this sounds really cliche, but a life of adventure. I wanted to do something exciting, something that was worthwhile. So the army was the place for me to go, and I got to travel as well, obviously. So that was it was the obvious choice for me to go in the army, and it taught me a huge amount of about myself, and made me build that self-confidence, self-worth, and some resilience as well. Built the resilience that you and I and lots of other veterans share, because you have to. You don't get a choice. You have to.
Yeah, Can I just say something which is to you as well, Stuart? I don't want to sort of take over, but when I hear you guys talking, I talk about Frank Skinner feeling like a unicorn to me, but I have to say, I think up there would be people that have been in the military, because I'm just in awe of people who are in the military, because obviously my experience is only through documentaries, and I feel stiff with stress within a second, like watching their lives and what they have to endure just on a day-to-day level, not even when they're out in combat or anything. And I always think that's a mindset, the discipline, I suppose. I'm just, having grown up in a world where there was nothing like that, it was like we couldn't even set the alarm properly. And then I cry watching, some sort of SAS thing, or, when I'm watching that Ant Middleton thing and the way he talks to people, I cry.
Maybe Swifty, the military, and also Stu as well, has helped for you to kind of figure out who you guys were, because maybe you had this kind of rigid environment in order to work out who you were. Does that make sense? As in there wasn't that much choice, so you kind of, your true self.
I think there's an element of truth there, Alice, and I think that yes, the military shapes you, but you shape you. You're given an opportunity to shape yourself, to develop yourself.
It's really interesting you say that, because something I've always noticed about you is, say with, I've been in a bar and I've been waiting for you, whatever, and you get that, you hear you before you see you, don't you? Sort of thing. You hear him down at wherever he is, you hear him a mile away, and then when you finally do come into the booze or the mess or wherever we are, people look at you, you're missing your legs and whatnot, and straight away, they're a bit like, oh my God, should I look, shouldn't I look, sort of thing, should I engage? And you're straight away over to them, making them feel comfortable.
Yeah.
It's something I really admire to it. And, it's funny how you say, you know, you shape you, you know, and I've always wondered where you get that compassion and that warmth from.
I think thanks for saying that, but I think there's an element of what Emily was saying about who am I now in this room? You know, you're going into a room full of strangers, and who have I got to be now? How am I going to do this? How am I going to get either attention, or how am I going to be with these people? And I think since I was blown up, certainly probably before, but certainly since I was blown up, I've always felt I've not been one for those horrible awkward silences, which is why I'm waffling. But it's one of them. It's one of the things. I walk into a room and I don't want people to feel awkward. I don't want people to be reticent to not come forward. So it makes it easier to especially with you guys as well. Other guys that are new, not so much yourself, Stu, but the newer guys, the guys that are more recently injured. You know, it helps them realise that this room isn't that scary. You know, yes, there may be some people in here that you don't know, you've never met before, people from a different background, actors, public speakers, politicians, whoever. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You just go in and just put everyone at ease. And I kind of ignore the fact I've got no legs, you know. And I said it earlier on to you guys, and I often talk about the big nose, you know. And people say, oh yeah, the guy with the big nose, yeah, Swifty with the big nose. Oh, and he's got no legs as well. You know, it's the nose people notice first. But no, it's that thing. That's the way I've always been, and I think my injury and the process that I went through after the injury, that was a very quick learning curve for me, perhaps.
But I mean, Swifty, you do put people at ease, and I think Emily, you've for very different reasons, but you also have a similar traits. Because of what, I don't know whether it's because of what you've been through or just who you innately are as a person, you just like to make people feel at ease and sort of relaxed in your presence.
I'll tell you what I think, and again, I'd be interested to know, you know, your experiences, because I was aware that after I'd experienced loss, and, you know, as I say, everyone experiences loss, but mine was just odd because it was the box set. You know, most people get grief spaced out, whereas I got Red Wedding in Game of Thrones. You know, it was like, wow, the whole family gone in this very short period of time. So, and because my family were odd, they did it in completely the wrong order. It was like, we'll kill off the best character first, and then the others will go. And what I felt at the time, and it's interesting looking back at this, was, I guess, a sense of slight shame, because I would feel, you know, I compare myself to feeling like a raven, you know, or like the Monty Python foot, like I was harshing everyone's mellow every time I walked into a room, because that was my brand. My brand was death, you know, for a while. And I think what I started doing, and again, I don't know if you guys do this, but I got into the habit of referring to it to make people feel at ease, because I felt people would think, well, we can't mention it, better not mention death, better not mention it happened. Should we ask how she is? I don't know if it's the right thing. So I would make, because I feel I'm able to do that, I'd make jokes about it, not to the extent where they were tasteless or unpleasant, but it was my way of saying it's okay, it's all right. I'm fine with discussing it, because otherwise we're all going to tap dance around this, and I don't want that to happen, because that's, again, we're talking about being authentic and genuine, and that's not real. I'd rather someone said to me, I feel really uncomfortable because I don't know whether I can talk to you about this, and is it okay? That is great, you know. And so that's just what I tried to encourage after my experience. And again, I'd be interested to know if you felt similarly.
You know, I think you're right, and I do. You know, you've just summed me up, really. Walking in the room, a bar with Stu.
To me, you had a good career in the military, travelling, you know, seeing the world as a green jacket, and, you know, you're working hard, playing hard, bit of the jet the lead, you know.
Geezer.
Yeah, and then you're 26 years old, you're in Northern Ireland. Tell me more.
Well, I'd gone back to Northern Ireland it's my third tour, and I'd volunteered to go back out with the dogs as a dog handler, as a tracker dog handler, and started my third tour, and unfortunately I was the victim of a terrorist attack. The IRA dropped a coffee jar bomb I'm guessing they were aiming for my head, and they missed, obviously. But it landed at my feet, and it killed my buddy, my colleague, Geordie. He was an AES handler, that's Arms Explosive Search. The kind of dog Raymond could be one day, perhaps. Maybe, who knows?
I think, Swifty, you're being very generous, but I think we all know you're reaching wildly.
You never know.
Amazing at that.
You never know. So anyway, so the bomb dropped at my feet, and like I said, it was a coffee jar bomb. So it's quite literally a coffee jar with Semtex, is a mug to simulate, Semtex crammed into it with shipyard confetti, which is nuts, bolts, rivets, nails, anything that's going to fly and maim and kill. And it, like I say, it landed at my feet and went bang, put me on my backside, and I just sat there in a daze, a complete and utter daze. And I remember looking over at Geordie. Geordie was dead instantly. I'm not sure if I should go into a graphic description of what he looked like, but he's essentially lost his lungs, his heart, his throat, and his bottom jaw, and he was dead. And I looked down at him and just screamed at him, Geordie! Like wake up, Geordie, wake up. And I realised he's not getting up. And that's when I looked at myself and realised that this 26-year-old soldier who was 6'2", I wouldn't say I was a good-looking lad, but I was, I had some weight to me. And I just looked at myself and thought, that's it. That's the end of my career. That's the end of me. I'm going to die. So I'm not a very religious person, but I'm not a religious person at all. But my nan had died about 18 months, 2 years before. For some reason, I had it in my head that she was going to come and get me down that tunnel, the big long tunnel with the light at the end of it. And she's going to beckon me along like, Darren, come to the light. And so I looked up expecting this to happen. And it didn't, obviously. So I thought, right, I know what I'll do. I'll shoot myself. So I reached for a gun, my weapon, which always was on my hip. It was a pistol, and it should have been on my hip. This one day out of all of my tours, all of the days that I'd been in Northern Ireland, I'd always had a weapon on me at some point or within reach. This one time, I didn't have the weapon, and I really needed it because I didn't want to live life with no legs and fingers missing and everything else. So anyway, I reached for this gun. It wasn't there. I thought, bugger, what am I going to do now? At the same time, my dog Troy, who was a German Shepherd, by the way, Emily, Troy ran round to the guard room, to where the main body of guys were, and started barking them, just like Lassie does. And I think there's a few of us on here that remember Lassie. And started to bring the guys round. They all came running round, and the thing at the time, and it still happens now, is there was a soak period. So the guys can't come running in to help me. They're not allowed to. They shouldn't. And I know this because I would be doing the same as them. So they have to stay about 30, 40 metres away. And I realised they couldn't get to me.
And why? So what would happen if they did?
Sorry, I should have explained that. Sorry. In case of a secondary device, okay. The IRA and other terrorist organisations would often put a secondary device there to catch the people that are rescuing, the police or whoever else. So these guys have gone firm about 30 metres away, and I thought, well, I need to get to you. I need to get to them. So I tried crawling. Now, if any of you have ever tried this, and after this show, we can perhaps give it a go, try crawling with no legs. It's nigh on impossible. So I made a complete mess literally a mess on the floor with this big donut of blood as I crawled around in circles. Eventually, the guys came running towards me and started putting combat jackets and everything on me. And I remember Alice, am I allowed to swear on this?
Feel free.
Okay. You can always edit, can't you? This young medic stood in front of me, and they were all they had was combat jackets and T-shirts. So they were putting them on my stumps and everything, trying to stop this bleeding, because I was bleeding out. I was going to die. And the pain, I was in no pain at this point. There was no pain at all. I was completely compos mentis. Probably in those few seconds, those few minutes, the most alive I've ever been, to be honest. Apparently that's something to do with the chemicals in your brain. So anyway, this medic stood in front of me. I'm looking up at him and I said to him, Geordie, give me some fucking morphine, mate. I'm going to need some morphine in a minute. This is going to hurt. And he said, Geordie lad, and he's got this little fishing box with, I know all he's had in there was a safety pin and a bandage. And he's looked down at a plaster probably. He's looked down at me and he said, morphine, man? I've got no fucking morphine. The second he said that, I felt every bit of pain you could possibly feel in that situation. And I started screaming a lot. So at the same time, an ambulance turned up. This was an outpatient's ambulance. And there was no kit in it. It wasn't paramedics. They had nothing. They just had a taxi. So these guys jumped out with this trolley. They threw me on this trolley and shoved this trolley back in. And off we went. They slammed the doors and off we went through the streets of Belfast. I should have explained at the beginning. I don't think I really explained that probably. It's Belfast, right in the centre of Belfast. And off we've shot in this ambulance about 90 miles an hour through the streets of Belfast. And we hit every bump, lump, sleeping policeman, curb. If there was something to hit in Belfast, we hit it at 90 miles an hour. So I'm in the back. Nobody has put the brakes on this trolley. So I'm in the back with my leg in one hand. This was the leg that was, one leg was ripped off completely. The other leg's hanging on by about that much skin and tendon. And I've got this leg in my hand. My fingers are hanging on the back of my hand. There's blood everywhere. I'm barely clothed. Most of my clothes have been blown off me. And I'm on the back of this trolley, swinging about all over the place as we go around these bends. The guy in the back put his foot on the end of the trolley, so it pivoted it, so it increased the swing. You can imagine him pivoting like a pendulum. And he threw this mask at me and said, stick that on your face, stick it on your face. So I threw this mask on and it was Entonox. And he spun the taps, and I don't know what measure of Entonox he gave me, but it was basically laughing gas. I had laughing gas. And all of a sudden, this was the most funny situation that anyone could possibly be. I felt like I was in a Monty Python movie. It really did. And a couple of seconds later, we turn up at RVH, Royal Victoria Hospital, Belfast. And we went through come out of the ambulance. They pushed me down the corridor, and the corridor is exactly like you see in the films. Just a long, long corridor with strip light, double doors, strip light, double doors. And it goes on forever. It's like hours. Eventually, I end up in the A&E. A nurse came up to me, injected me with something, and then her and the two ambulance guys lifted me up and put me onto a hospital stretcher. And the two ambulance guys went to take their blood-soaked, with bits of me on it, stretcher away. And as they did, I caught the tailcoat of one of the ambulance drivers, and I tugged on it, and he turned around and I put my thumb up and I said, cheers, mate, thanks very much. I'm obviously still off my tits on the internet. And he turned around and he put his thumb up and he said, never you, mate, big man. You get better. And that was it. I was out. I was gone. Went unconscious. They kept me in a coma, and they woke me up about 4 days later. And I remember a nurse, a matron, up on the intensive care unit. She was stood at the end of my bed, and as I woke up, I still had all the tubes in me and everything. She said, Darren, do you know what you've lost? And I nodded and I said, yeah. And she said, you know everything. You know what you remember? And I said, yeah, I do. She said, right, do you want to visit her? And I said, like nodding my head, not knowing who it was. I said, it's your dad. Your dad's come to see you. And my dad came in the door and he sat down. And my dad's a proper London geezer. And he sat there and he maybe leaned on the bed. He said, all right, son, is there anything I can get you? And I was sat there with no legs and fingers missing and all this. Now you're all right, Dad. So, about 8 days after that, they flew me back over to mainland UK and got in an ambulance and was off to Woolwich Hospital, which was the last of the military hospitals. And they've closed them all down now, or all the original ones. And off we went to the hospital. And I spent the next 18 months in rehab and that hospital having release operations and all sorts done on my legs and what have you. So that was it really. That was the initial part of me getting blown up. That's how I went from being a 6'2" strapping soldier to 4'6" fat actor wannabe.
Stu, can I just say that to me says everything about Swift, what I know of Swifty already, that he finished that extraordinary story with, well, that was it, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was.
It's extraordinary hearing that story.
It was a weird time. It was a weird time. And something struck me where you said a while back, Emily, about zero. You started at zero. Whilst I was in the hospital, one of the nurses came up to me and said, she's a very good friend of mine now. I'm actually godfather to her children, but she said, you know, a lot of people that have trauma happen to them. She was talking specifically about physical trauma, but people that have trauma, they find that thinking about it as being born again, as the start, zero. And I took that really literally. And again, not in a religious way, I think the same way you mean it. I really, actually, the second that bomb went off was me being born again. And I had all the trauma of the birth. And now I'm in my infancy, I'm in my baby years. And I really did have to learn to walk again and learn to do everything all again. Initially, with nothing, I didn't even have the use of my hands and my arms because my arm was damaged as well. But so I had to learn all over again how to be a person again, and that was my zero. I'm now 29 years old. Awesome. I'm now 29 years old, so that was really an eye opener to me, and something that I had happened to me, which I now look back and look at it favourably. I look at it as a really positive experience. It's about 3 weeks into my stay at the hospital at the Woolwich, and I've been getting bathed by bunches of nurses, 6 or 7 nurses every day, which is kind of cool, but you're not independent. I wasn't doing anything for myself, even going to the toilet. Everything had to be done with someone else's help. So anyway, I wanted to have a bath this particular day on my own. And I said to one of the doctors, any chance I could have a bath? And he wasn't very happy about it. He was like, no, you can't do this, you can't. Anyway, I convinced him that I'd be okay. So he said, right, okay, go for it. So I had a bath and did what you do in the bath. I jumped, got myself clean, got up on the side of the bath, transferred into my wheelchair, and I span round to get a towel. And as I did, I realised the door was shut. Now, when there's been 6 or 7 nurses in there, the door's always open. There's no room for the door to be shut, so the door's open. Now the door's shut, and on the back of the door is a full-length mirror. And I've just spun round, and for the first time since I got blown up, I can see myself. I've not looked in the mirror at any point, not even a normal face mirror. I haven't seen myself. And now I'm naked. Obviously, I've got out of the bath, and I'm looking at myself, and I could see everything. I could see all the scars. I could obviously see that I'm missing my legs, fingers, the shrapnel marks, the stitches, the staples, the holes where they put tubes in me. Everything was exposed. And I sat there and just stared at myself, and it must have been a good 15, 20 minutes. And I didn't start crying. I didn't start bawling. I just stared. And after a while, I realised, it came to me that I've got a choice here, haven't I? I can do one of 2 things. I can sit with my chin on my chest and let all these nurses wipe my arse for me for the rest of my life. Or I can pick my chin up and get on with the rest of my life. And that's what I ended up doing. And that really was the kind of moment I thought, no, I need to start doing stuff for myself here. I need to get a grip of this. I'm not going to die. Well, not today. So I need to get a grip of this and move on. And so that's what I did, really. And 18 months later, I finished my rehab and just got on with the rest of my life. Went back to traveling, went around the world in a wheelchair, doing stuff that I'd done before and some stuff I hadn't done before. Went to places that I'd never been before. And I loved it. And I've still got the bug and I still travel. So yeah, that was the thing. Sorry, Ash.
I should haven't wanted, because it's just been so like magical listening to you and your words, and I just wanted to ask Emily, because I saw you nodding there, and I'd just be really interested, when there's physical rehabilitation, and this isn't something that I've been through, but, I've worked with lots of people who have. It's a well-trodden path, hospital, rehab, recovery, physios, and you have experienced your own loss. It's not a physical loss, but it's a different type of loss. I suppose, is there a process to your grieving?
Well, I think for me, it felt, because my sister was, it's sort of relevant to our childhood, really, that she, we weren't like any other siblings that I knew, me and my sister. I always say, she had a yellow suitcase and I had a pink suitcase, and we travelled around the world. And I honestly remember I would see the yellow suitcase and I just thought, as long as that's in my sight, as long as the yellow suitcase is there, I'll be safe, and I won't feel frightened. Because I did sometimes feel, travelling around with my parents, you just never knew where you were going to end up or what was going to happen, or, So she represented a lot more than just a sibling, I think, to me. And even into adulthood, I was a bit, I always described, I think I described it in the book, I can't remember, but I always said my life as I got older was as if Mike Leigh had tried to direct an episode of Sex and the City. And then they'd looked at it and said, this is a bit grim and urban. We can't have this, not very glamorous. She's got no money. So, I'd done that sort of Carrie Bradshaw thing without any of her shoes or the Mr. Big. And my sister had, interestingly, gone down the dog family route. She's not quite the Labrador. It was a half Chihuahua, half pug called Mr. Giggle. Brilliantly named by my niece. I know, my niece Mimi said, I'm calling him Mr. Giggle. And my sister was like, right, okay. But it was brilliant. So, she had, I always say it's like, she had hit all those beats, those punctuation marks. And I hadn't. It was interesting. One of us had rebelled and the other, to a degree, I'd conformed, to my parents' lifestyle. But we still spoke 3-4 times a day. It was my, hey, it's me. It's me. What are you doing? And she'd had 2 kids and she was married. So when I found out, when she was diagnosed, she literally just said, I'm feeling a bit fluey. She just had a baby. Her baby was 10 months old at the time, 11 months old. So she just assumed it was, you just had a baby, and she went to the doctor and that's what you would assume. But this just wouldn't go. So she called NHS Direct, and it was so sudden. She was in hospital. And I'll always remember sitting in this room, and I was just sitting there thinking, no, this is not happening. It just felt so surreal. You're on autopilot. And this consultant, and I always remember her because she wasn't a horrible person. She was a doctor delivering news. But I remember feeling, my feelings changed towards her afterwards, irrationally. And she sat there, and it was me, my mother, and my brother-in-law. And we were waiting to hear the diagnosis. And first we heard she had cancer, and that was kind of a shock. I'd actually been told that story a few days before. But we were waiting to hear. My sister, I always remember, because we were so close, I knew what she wanted to hear. And I said, how long? And then I paused and I thought, that's not my right to ask that question. She might not want to know the answer to that. And I remember my sister was in disbelief. She said, but I've got a 10-year-old and a 1-year-old. She was 11 months old. She said, I can't leave them. And I didn't have kids. And it was that disbelief but that's not how it works, And then we thought I thought she might have a couple of years. I prayed, but, then I thought she'd get months at least. But they told us, we think it'll be a matter of months now. But she died 3 weeks later. It was just like, gone. And I'll always remember when we went to the intensive care unit, and it was really amazing. It sounds ridiculous saying amazing, but, regarding what Swifty was saying about how I see that as the point at which my life changed, because I'd never done anything like that. I'd been sheltered from that, from that sort of pain, and watching my sister in pain, and becoming her protector, saying, I remember saying to the nurse, she needs more drugs. I was like the pusher. That's what I used to say. And I said, give her more drugs, And she only had a few days. We got the call one night, and she was in the Royal Marsden, who are amazing in London. And I was there, and I had that moment with her, beforehand. And we were still joking and laughing. She was the same as she'd always been. And my mum was there, and I was taking the piss out of my mum's clothing and saying, what the hell has my mum come at us? And I just saw a little smile, and that was like, good, she's still her. And yeah, it was a really tough period. And it was hard because I was kind of estranged from my dad, who came along, and it was complicated with him there. But what that experience taught me, and I was lucky I had that, because I had to go through it again so soon afterwards with my mum, who got motor neurone disease. And I mean, she always said, I knew that. She turned around to me one day and she said, I'm really sorry, but I've kind of given up. The loss was so profound for her to lose her daughter, and I got it, and then my dad just collapsed in a cafe, and he died. So I feel terrible. I'm adding my parents on, they're just they look them up in the end of the book. But I think that the death of my sister just changed us all really fundamentally. And I definitely think the intensive care unit, Swifty, you were talking about that moment that you felt on the floor and you kind of had a choice. And I remember being in the intensive care unit, and this incredible doctor, who was also very good looking, but that's not the point. He yeah, well, I like that because I was talking to my sister and I knew she'd enjoy that. Because I had an embarrassing moment with him, and I said, oh, that doctor looks like a GQ model, and he was standing right behind me, and he said, oh, thank you. But I remember he said to me, and I never forgot it, he said, people always talk about living in the present, don't they? But they never do. He said it only happens in situations like this, a life or death situation. Like Swifty, you were in the moment, you had decisions to make, got to get out of here. I'm devastated about my mate, but I don't have time I have to survive now, and I have to prevent more deaths, So I think for me, that's what it felt like in a much lesser scale, but I definitely felt that changed me, because it was the first time I'd ever experienced that sense of, no one mentioned yesterday, no one mentioned tomorrow. In the intensive care unit. It's the only place I'd ever noticed that. And I'm sure it's similar in the army. You're not going, oh, I was really upset about what my mate did yesterday. It's like, mate, there's stuff going on. We're going to die. If you keep talking like that, you need to move on. And so I would see that there were similarities in some way between those two experiences, because I was so purely focused on the moment and what it meant, hideous as that was, tragic as it was for a young mum to die like that and lose her life. The legacy, and I see that in a positive way, that she left an extraordinary legacy, because we were all changed. I started having therapy. I went to my sister's therapist, which was great, because I sort of thought, well, I don't have time for previously on ER with a new one. I need them to know everything. But it does, I held on to that. And when I got low, I think after I'd lost my sister and both my parents, and then a relationship, to be fair, it wasn't my partner at the time. It's a lot for anyone to take on, when you're not sort of married with children. So I did go through a bad time then. And I remember sitting there and I called the Samaritans. I started calling them a lot because I was feeling quite suicidal. And I just because I felt it was endless. It just felt I'd wake up and it was swimming through treacle, trying to feel normal. I tried everything. I tried antidepressants. I tried everything. But then I think when I came out of that sort of funk I experienced, that living in the moment thing was what saved me. What I'd learned in the intensive care unit, and how that manifested itself in my life was, I had a list I always called the things I always say I'm going to do but never actually do. I'm going to get a dog. I'm going to decorate my house and get floral wallpaper. Yeah. All these things, I'm going to write a book. I always said that, but instead I watched Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, or played with other people's dogs. And that's what I think was life-changing for me, was being able to access that feeling and knowing what it felt like for life to end for someone else, which again is something you guys experience all the time. So, or have experienced, and that's very powerful, and it changed my life, that moment. And I'm often interested to hear, and I want to hear what the guys have to say about this, because I'm not frightened of death at all. And it's really weird because most people I know are. And I don't know whether it's because I've had to use a weird phrase, see people off, see people on their way. I've done it I was the only person, with my dad. That was the last of it. It was my sister and then my mum and then it was my dad. And I remember someone when I was really young saying to me, it was a boyfriend actually, he wasn't very nice at university, and he said, what can you do? Richard can drive, so-and-so can roll a spliff, sorry. But what can you do? And I couldn't answer, and now I think I'm really good at sending people on their way. I'm really good at people's last moments. I know how to handle that, and I feel like that was a privilege to have done that now. So yeah, they're different stories, but oddly I see so many connections in some senses.
And what an amazing gift to have, to see someone on their way, because ultimately you just want everyone to have a dignified death, don't you? And to be there with them. And
it's hard because you sort of think what it's Swifty, losing your colleague, and I cannot imagine, and having to actually think on your feet and strategically as well. But I think, that I would look at that and I think you were with him. You were with him. You saw him on his way because you were with him. It's really, there's an honour in that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't get to speak to him. We were chatting before. We were just sat there. We were feeding the dogs, actually. We were just giving the dogs some dinner. And then bang, it went bang, and that was it. But we were chatting and stuff. So yeah. I suppose I did see him on his way to a point. And it's something in the military. You don't become blasé about it. It doesn't become matter of fact. No, not at all. But you do accept that you're in a profession where that is a likelihood, or a possibility, I should say, a possibility. And the acceptance of that perhaps makes when it happens, when colleagues die or are injured, it makes it not okay, but it makes it slightly less impactful perhaps, because it's your job, it's what you do. So that would be the only place I'd say different. But the actual in the hospital, listening to you talking about your experience in hospital there, it's very similar, and hospitals have that way of bringing about stark reality. This is really it. This isn't a soap opera or something you're watching on Netflix. This is real life, and it can bring you up short, but it can focus the mind. I think you said that anyway, didn't you? It focused you.
And you realise, I realised as well, I'd only ever seen, and again, we get very romanticised, I'm sure you laugh at some of the films you see which portray sort of military life, because whenever I see deathbed scenes, in families, and it's always the same, there's the music and I'll always love you. And of course that doesn't happen. Someone's organs are failing, they're out of it. Sometimes they're bad tempered. Sometimes they say odd things. I had something which I'm really happy to share because I think it's helpful, but my dad said a really weird thing when my sister died. And people always are nervous about raising this, but the reason I want to mention it is because I don't blame him for that, because he lost a child. He was, I didn't know how severe it was at the time. He had Alzheimer's, which was getting worse, but people just do odd things. And my dad said after my sister died, he said, the best one has gone. And that was tough. And my brother-in-law sort of rushed to comfort me and said, he didn't mean that. He didn't mean that. And that took me a while to come to terms with. But the reason I talk about that, I'm at total peace with him saying that, because, I'm not perfect. We have said things. He was experiencing pain. I think I sort of feel, looking back on that, at the time I felt, oh, you've taken this moment away from me. This was my sister's, this is my last moment. And now, I look at it, and a friend of mine, David Baddiel, who's a mate of mine, he was very good about it, and he made me see it in a comic fashion. He said, your father was theatrical to the last. He said he thought he was King Lear. He was turning it into some Shakespearean speech, and unfortunately you were collateral damage. That's just, he was, and I saw that. And in fact, what I thought was, my sister would have laughed and said, oh, for God's sake, Dad, really? And it was okay. But the only reason I mention it is because I think we're served up a fantasy, whether it's about, you know, a romantic notion about life in the military, or, you know, look after my wife and children. It's all that bullshit, and it's the same. Yeah, no, it is all the letter or the, and it is quite damaging, because I realised how brutal and raw it is to be in an intensive care unit. That language you talk about, people are very matter of fact, and you know, they will say she's going to die at around 3:00 today, and you're like, but that's not in the film. I don't, you know. So yeah, and equally, people behave oddly in moments of crisis, but you have to accept that and understand that it's a very complex thing to when someone dies, isn't it? And you know, so yeah.
And I actually think, I mean, Stu, I was just going to bring in a bit of your story here of when you were in Afghanistan and you had been attacked by, you thought you were going to be with the Afghan police, and actually was the Taliban. And so you'd been attacked and you were with your team, and was it your colleague had sort of died?
Yeah, they killed three. They killed 3 of my team. Yeah, there was a policeman in this checkpoint, and we all thought he was a policeman, but it turned out to be they paid off, the Taliban had paid off the police, so one of them dressed up as a police officer, and as we exited the compound, he shot us all in the back. Luckily, I was outside the compound at this point, but the 3 lads were killed in an instant. As I was listening to you guys, I'm trying to ask the questions today, so I'm trying not to turn on. But you just have to carry on. It's not that you're not allowed to grieve. It's just really you don't have time, and maybe, you know, that's why there are an awful lot of lads and girls that come out of the services that are a little bit lost, if you like. But it's what's the answer? I don't know what the answer is, because you just do have to carry on. The next day, they're not taking a day off. You know, the enemy aren't taking a day off, so you can't afford to take a day off. So you just have to get on with it. Battlefield replacements come in, you go back out into the field. Just one of them.
Yeah.
Do you think, I'm interested, just as someone who's had no experience of that world, has it changed, you know, as far as you know now, in terms of, is that changing a bit? I get the impression it is, the sort of focus on just dealing with trauma and mental health. And I suppose there's more awareness about the impact that can potentially have long term.
Yeah, I've done lots of studying on mental health, and I'm really good with my all my feelings now, if you like. Obviously, I've spent a couple of months in a mental health unit. That's where I had to be to get better and stuff like that. But I'm really in tune with my body now, both physically and mentally. And what we all need to just tell ourselves a lot, and I have to tell myself a lot, is one, just be kind to yourself, and the other one is every single one of us, everyone on the planet, everyone. People think that I'm too tough for mental health. No one is. Every single person gets it. Just like, you know, the only difference is, you know, you break an arm, everyone sees it in a sling. No one can see what's going on in the old noodle, can they? So you just have to be a bit more vocal. But that's where I think the tough part is people aren't sometimes strong enough, or whatever it may be, to just say, I just need a day for me, or I just need a morning or an hour or half an hour just to sort of regroup. And if people would just take time for themselves, we'd achieve a hell of a lot more, and there'd still be a lot more people on this planet, I believe.
Definitely. But I think the military as a whole has kind of had a bit of a seismic change towards mental health. I know definitely. In the last 10 years, you can definitely see that, and the amount of support and just acceptance. You know, people just talk about it. There's the physical injuries that you have, and there will be mental health injuries.
The charity, Blesma, have been absolutely fantastic, and they obviously they are the limbless charity, so they help guys, you know, without limbs and whatnot. And luckily, I'm in with them because they class eyesight as a limb. But they are also fantastic on a mental health scale. That they've sorted me out with some therapy in the past. And it's just they're really good like that. And if it's always good to talk to someone externally, I find therapy's really helped me.
It's taken. Sorry, Stu. Sorry to butt in, mate.
It's all right, mate.
It's taken 29 years, but I've seen in those 29 years, I've seen a massive sea change in the way mental health issues. I was really fortunate because I was blown up around the time of the first Gulf War. There wasn't a hell of a lot of casualties coming back. So the hospital, although it was geared up, it wasn't at full capacity. So I had all of the facilities to myself. I had all access to all sorts of therapy and anything. But I had a psychologist for the first 6 weeks in the hospital. I had a psychologist and a psychiatrist visit me once a week separately to do assessment, to just chat through with me. And I still hold to this day, that's the thing that really did help me get my noodle around it, like you say, mate, get my head around what's happened. I think a lot of the drugs I was on wasn't helping. I know, Emily, you mentioned some drugs a while back. Some prescribed drugs. If
anyone's just tuned in, I wasn't a heroin addict. But
no.
Please don't use that as the trailer.
I did.
Emily was on drugs, so known drug addict, Emily Dean,
yes.
I did go back to qualify it was prescribed.
I know you did. You made me sound much more exciting, like Keith Richards. I liked it.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I was very fortunate that the doctors and the nurses around me, the staff, they wanted me off those drugs as soon as possible. And I went cold turkey on a lot of them, painkillers and stuff like that, and started managing things for myself. And I had the full weight of the British Army or the British military medical services behind me, and then the NHS as well. So I was really very fortunate. I think for Stu and the era that Stu's from, they came back. There was masses of them coming back, and it was a shock.
Yeah.
It was a shock to the system, but I think that the military are actually getting their heads around it, and they are making good moves now, and are starting to help people. There is always room for improvement. There is always room for improvement, and we'll always play catch up. I think we'll always play catch up, but people are being helped. Stu, I know you've had more experiences than most with this side of military or veterans, but it is much better than it was.
I think because this might be something that you've touched upon before, might be quite interesting. Stu, when you were on the neuro wing.
I've actually heard Emily say this once or twice. Okay. I actually heard you say something to Swifty early, comparing sort of thing, and it's something that I found. So when I was on and off in the neuro ward for about 2 years. With learning how to make cups of teas and.
Sorry, Stu, what's that? Is that like so it's neurology, basically, where you do your rehabilitation?
So, when the vehicle was hit by an IED in Afghanistan, I quite seriously damaged. You got 5 lobes in the brain, and I damaged the frontal, temporal, and the optical lobe, which in turn caused some loss of eyesight and bits and pieces. Mm-hmm. But I was there for on and off for 2.5 years in a place called Headley Court, and what I would find was when I would come home and be with my family and friends and whatnot, barbecues, pub or whatever, that no one was telling me their problems because they felt like they couldn't. Like they felt like, how do I say to Stewie that I've got a headache or I don't feel good today or something like that? And I absolutely hated that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you point that out, because I think... I've experienced myself, and even I feel in this situation with you guys who've been through that, I'm doing it. I'm playing top trumps with trauma, and actually there is no top trumps, as we know. And I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because I think, again, we're doing what is important, which is you're getting it out there saying, well, you said that and you don't need to. So thanks. I just want to give you all a hug. But I did experience that myself. People withholding information from me, people saying we better not see that film, and sort of screening things, it should be upset. It was all came from the most lovely, beautiful place, but it makes you feel other. And I think when you're suffering from any sort of trauma or the incidents that you guys went through, you feel other enough, for God's sake. It's like what you want to feel is just treat me like everyone else. And that's the thing I had to sort of remind people. And I would say to people, they'd say, I feel really bad even mentioning this to you, but my dad died. And I'd say, I don't have the monopoly on grief. It's not like no one else will ever have bad things happen to them. This is, you've been through something. Oh, if you split up with a boyfriend, tell me, you know. I mean, I might draw the line if you're crying because someone unfollowed you on Instagram the day after my sister died. I'm not going to cut you any slack there. Okay, you're cancelled. But generally, I felt similarly, that I just wanted people to. It's that thing people always say when they get famous, which is, it's not you that changes, it's other people around you. I don't think that's true in Elvis's case. I think he did go a bit bananas, didn't he? But generally I see that, and it's when you experience any sort of trauma or huge life change, you know, it's just I'm me still. I may be different in some way physically, I may have had stuff going on mentally, I may have experienced loss, but I'm still the same person. You don't have to tiptoe around me.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I just picked up on this there, is one of the things that's really important is, and Alice and I have discussed this previously, but people often think, be it physical or mental trauma or grief, that why me? It's just me. Why is it always me? Why am I the one feeling this? You know, I'm the only one in the world, and that's something that we don't mean to do, but it's something it's innately in us, isn't it? You know, to feel it's me. And it's when you're talking to people, and I think that's something perhaps all of us here do. Certainly, Emmy and I, we've talked about it. Is putting someone at ease and allowing someone to say, actually, I've been through that as well, or I've had that, and saying, and us, we're saying to them by being jokey, funny, whatever, being open, being arms open to them. You're saying it's okay. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. We'll talk about it, and allowing that person to know that they are not the only one. And I think with mental health, that's the biggest thing. You are not on your own. You are not the only person on the planet. I know it sounds bad in some ways because everyone wants to think they're a bit special, right? But in this particular instance, you're not special because other people go through this grief. Some of the circumstances might be a bit different, but people go through that, be it grief, some sort of trauma, mental trauma or physical trauma. Other people have been through it. And talking about it with them or with other people about it is a good thing. Talk.
Now we come to the final question of our podcast. To you both, what would you say to your younger selves? Who would like
Swifty,
to go
you go first.
Okay.
Gentleman first.
Well, I've given this some thought, actually, because I've been asked this question before as well. And nothing, get on with it. That's what I'd say. Just get on with it. No, I think one thing would be, when you're 26 years old, if you find yourself in Belfast, look up. Because that's where the bomb came from. I'd look up. Be happy with yourself. If you're happy with yourself, everything else will fall into place. Yeah.
Thank you. And Emily, to you.
I think I'd have a couple of things. I think I'd say it's not what you think it's going to be, but maybe that's a good thing, you know, because I think that's something that I think you spend your whole life thinking, I want this, I want this, I want this, and then you don't get it. And I think sometimes it's what you don't expect isn't a bad thing. You know, it can change your life in extraordinary ways. And I think the other thing, it was just a powerful thing that I learned in the course of therapy work that I was doing, which was about forgiveness, really, about letting go, which is very much to do with what we've been talking about, I think, in terms of moving on and in terms of not living in the present, essentially, rather than yesterday. And I learned a really powerful thing, which was the phrase, everyone is guilty, no one is to blame. And I say that to myself a lot. I said it about my parents when my dad said that thing, or everything that happens in life. I try and remind myself of that we've all got history, we've all got baggage, we've all had stuff that's happened to us. People will meet you guys in the street and have no clue, you know, of every aspect of your life, you know. And I think that's something that's important to remember. So yeah, I think we're all guilty of maybe hurting people sometimes, saying them doing the wrong thing, not behaving in a way that we'd feel proud of, but no one's to blame. I believe that. You know, I don't believe anyone intends to harm you. So, yeah.
That's lovely. Thank you for sharing that. And that's it. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Coming up next week, we talk to Olympic, World Championship and Commonwealth Games medalist, much-loved TV presenter and motivational speaker Chris Akabusi and veteran Matt Armitage. Also, don't forget we are releasing a remastered episode from Series 1 every Thursday. This week, we hear from Ray Winstone and veteran Ken Bellringer. Thank you to my co-host Stuart Harris and everyone in our production team. This podcast was generously funded by Blesma, the Limbless Veterans charity, delivered by the Drive Project, supported by Facebook, and presented by me, Alice Driver, creator of the Making Generation R campaign. Huge thanks go to Sai Harmer, whose idea lit the torch paper of this podcast, and to you for listening.
If you've been affected by any of the issues discussed, then please take a look at our webpage or show notes, where you'll be able to find more information on support services.
Should you like to listen to any of the veterans' incredible stories, then they are available as part of this podcast series on the Making Generation R website. The Resilience Sessions grew out of the Making Generation R campaign, a project that trains injured veterans from Blesma to tell their stories, so far to over 100,000 people, from the young and vulnerable to frontline services and first responders across the UK. To find out more about Making Generation R and to book a free talk or workshop if you're a school, just Google Making Generation R.
If you've enjoyed listening today, then please do subscribe, give us a 5-star review and share it with your family and friends. You never know who it might help.